Selesnya, the color combination for people who want to go so wide and so tall at the same time that a normally proportioned board state comes out the other end. Good morning, good day, or good evening, wherever you are. While a lot of green-white commanders are about making tokens and providing counters, there's more diversity out there than you might think. So, without further ado, and whether you're re-sleeving your commander decks right now, baking something nice, or watching this to put off an important existential decision, sit back, relax, and enjoy. Finally, it's time to talk about some Magic cards again. Let's kick this list off with Best Soul Nourisher, a 3-mana 1/1 human citizen. Whenever one or more other creatures with base power and toughness 1/1 enter the battlefield under your control, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on Bess. And whenever Bess attacks, each other creature you control with base power and toughness 1/1 gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on Bess. One of the more interesting things a commander can do, in my opinion, is when it alters the deck building process significantly. And Bess is making me look at a completely new subset of cards, namely 1/1s. And let me tell you, there's quite a few very good 1/1s. There's all the Mana Dorks. There's also Dryad Arbor, which is almost a Mana Dork, but it's also a land. There is cards like Benevolent Bodyguard, which sacrifice themselves to protect Bess, also very nice. There is cards like Pendelhaven Elder, which is a 1/1 by itself, but it can also give each 1/1 creature you control +1/+2 until end of turn. So it's a Pendelhaven effect, but for all creatures at the same time. Wild Beastmaster and Champion of Lamphold are 1/1s to begin with, but they get stronger progressively and have additional value in the combat step. Heronblade Elite is a 3-mana 1/1 that whenever a human enters the battlefield, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it taps for as much mana as it has power. So all of these cards, 1/1s, all of them benefit from Bess, or Bess benefits from them. A card that I didn't mention was Shrufus Sprout Sire. Wow, say that 3 times. It's a 3-mana 1/1 Sprawling, it has trample, and whenever a Sprawling you control deals combat damage to a player, you get to create that many 1/1 green Sprawling creature tokens. So, let's say you attack with this, Bess is a 3/3, your Sprawling gets +3/+3, deals 4 damage to a player, you get to create 4 1/1 green Sprawling creature tokens. All of them are 1/1s, so Bess gets 4 +1/+1 counters. Another card that you could play in your best deck, but you could also choose as your commander, is Kadira, Caller of the Small, a 3-mana 3/3 Orc Ranger. It has trample, and whenever Kadira deals combat damage to a player, for each token you control, you get to create a 1/1 white rabbit creature token. So you get to double up on the number of tokens, but the only thing you get is 1/1 white rabbits. This one specifically feels a bit like Chatterfang. Chatterfang, if you don't know, is a squirrel commander that whenever you create a token, instead you create those tokens plus an additional 1/1 squirrel. And Chatterfang itself also makes use of the tokens by sacrificing them to give something +X/-X. So at first glance, of course, Kadira is a little weaker, maybe, but what I like is it goes into a different direction. This is also a bit Voltron-y instead of Chatterfang, who just sits there and you benefit by just creating tokens from whatever. Kadira herself needs to deal the damage, and then you can pair it with all of the great payoffs for having tokens. Bloomburrow, of course, is a set that you should look at first. Valley Quest Caller is a 2-mana 2/3 that gives all your rabbits, bats, birds, and mice +1/+1, and whenever one or more of those enters the battlefield, you get to scry 1. So while you won't get to scry through your entire deck, if you land a hit with Kadira, you get to scry 1 and buff the power of all those tokens. Intangible Virtue, the same Lord-like effect, +1/+1, but Vigilance also, which is very good in Commander, where you can just swing freely at someone and still have defense. I think a must include in any and every token deck from now on is going to be Caretaker's Talent. 3 mana, it's a class. At the first level, whenever you have a token enter under your control, you draw a card, but this only triggers once each turn. For an additional mana, you can level it up and make a token copy of a token. And If you pay 4 more mana and get it to level 3, all your creature tokens get +2/+2. Really, like the first level alone is good enough. Paying 1 more to create another 1/1 rabbit, that's nice, but remember you also draw a card. And then for just 4 mana, giving all of your creatures +2/+2 permanently after having drawn a bunch of cards already, that's great. Jaheira, Friend of the Forest. 3 mana, 2/3, Human Elf Druid, and all your tokens tap for green. This includes stuff like food tokens and treasure tokens, so you don't need to sacrifice those treasures and you can make good use of food tokens. So this subset of cards should really complement each other well, and what you do with 1,000,000 white rabbit tokens, that's up to you, whether you sacrifice them or buff them even more to kill everyone with a horde of rabbits. If you play Arena, you might have seen Calix Guided by Fate already, where he is used to make copies of the Overlords from Duskmourn. Calix has Constellation. Whenever he or another enchantment enter the battlefield under your control, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature. That's of course not very powerful, but whenever Calix or an enchanted creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may create a token that's a copy of a non-legendary enchantment you control, but you only do this once each turn. Seeing as he is a 3 mana 2/2, the first effect is but the second effect you really get a lot for just a 3 mana commander. Of course, when we talk enchantments, we need to mention the elephant in the room. Sithis Harvest's Hand is probably the enchantment commander in the colors we're talking about right now, where whenever you play an enchantment, you gain a life, but also draw a card, and for 2 mana, that's insane. But as I mentioned, the synergy with the Overlords from Duskmourn is really great. Overlords are cards that have a pretty good stat line already. Let's look at the green one, Overlord of the Hauntwoods. It's a 5 and a 6/5, and whenever it enters or attacks, you get to create a tapped colorless land token named Everywhere that is every basic land type. But the trick here is that you can also play them as an enchantment with time counters on it. So you can pay 3, Overlord will enter the battlefield, but as an enchantment, not a creature, then it takes down 4 times and then it becomes a creature. The Overlords don't do everything on their own because the Overlords are enchantment creatures, but not enchanted creatures. So you do need to play some auras. There is a few creatures that are auras if you bestow them, but also enchantment creatures if you don't. So you can make use of those. Just look at the old Theros blocks, and I'm sure you'll find great stuff. The next one is a classic, and I don't even have like a concrete plan or idea for this type of deck, but I wanted to mention her because she's been a favorite of mine for a long time. It's Captain Sisay. For 4 mana, 2 generic and a green-white, you get a 2/2 legendary creature that taps to search your library for a legend or a legendary card, meaning a legendary creature or a legendary card. You get to reveal that card and put it into your hand and shuffle. I think I've said this before, but legendary creatures to me embody the spirit of Commander more than any other card type. So Sisay has a special place in my heart. Of course, this is a commander that tutors, which is something that a lot of people are opposed to. Tutors in general are a bit controversial, but especially if your commander does it so you get to do it every game, I think some playgroups might not enjoy that type of gameplay. But since you are tutoring for these characters that made up the story of Magic for the longest time, or SpongeBob, you know, I think Sisay will get a pass for some. One thing that needs mentioning though, because it's not obvious to everyone, is the fact that you can search for legendary sorceries like Kamal's Druidic Vow and Urza's Ruinous Blast, which are very, very good card in and of themselves. And being able to tutor for a one-sided exile-based board wipe is crazy good. So include those in your deck list, and also keep an eye open for potential other legendary instants or sorceries that Wizards might print in the future. Danitha New Benalia's Light is a 3 mana 2/2 human knight. It has Vigilance, Trample, and Lifelink, and once during each of your turns, you may cast an aura or equipment spell from your graveyard. Danitha, of course, has excellent keywords already. Vigilance is great because it plays defense, Trample is great because it plays offense, and Lifelink work together so well. The only thing that Danitha is really missing is protection, but since this is clearly an aura or equipment commander, you could choose the great keyword Totem Armor to be a mainstay in your auras. Stuff like Hyena Umbra or Spider Umbra, those are enchantments that you put on a creature, and should the creature die, instead the Totem Armor falls off, goes to the graveyard, and the creature survives. And then should this happen during your opponent's turn, they pass back to you, you can just replay the Hyena Umbra, which makes it really tough to deal with Danitha the normal way, meaning destroying it. Of course, you still need to be careful about exile-based removal. Another thing that works really nicely is the Ordeals. Let's take a look at Ordeal of Nylea. It's a 2-mana aura. When enchanted creature attacks, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on it, and then if it has 3 or more +1/+1 counters on it, you get to sacrifice Ordeal of Nylea. When you sacrifice Ordeal, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. So what would happen is you play this onto your Danitha, you attack 3 times, then you sacrifice it. And next turn, you could just play Ordeal of Nylea from your graveyard, attack again, immediately sacrifice it, because Danitha will already have 3 +1/+1 counters on her, and this way you get to search up all your basics really quickly. Daughter of Autumn is a very tricky one to figure out, and it's mostly here because I love trying to make old cards work. The first idea I had is looking for cards that trigger upon the creature receiving damage, but there really isn't much. Best I could find was Druid's Call or Rite of Passage. Druid's Call is a 2-mana enchant creature, so an aura. Whenever an enchanted creature is dealt damage, its controller puts that many squirrel tokens into play. And Rite of Passage is a card that reads, whenever a creature you control is dealt damage, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on it. From a more recent set, there's also Flumph. It's a 2-mana 0/4 jellyfish, defender flying, and whenever Flumph is dealt damage, you and target opponent each draw a card. Next type of card I would add, trying to make this commander work, is some form of protection for Daughter of Autumn. So cards like Darksteel Plate, because she's taking all the damage onto herself, so we need some way to make her stay alive. Then I got a bit lost and decided to look up on EDHREC to find the next piece of the puzzle. And then I kind of remembered from my past a creature type that I always found very fascinating that makes less sense today than it did back then, but it still works. And those are the Encores, or Encore, I don't think it's an Encore. Those are nomads, and some of them have the ability to, for 0 mana, to redirect the next 1 point of damage from them to another creature you control. So they kind of do the opposite of what Daughter of Autumn does. Daughter of Autumn takes all the damage onto herself. Nomads block and then deal the damage to something else. And I think this works very nicely with stuff like Rite of Passage, since you can distribute the damage across all of your creatures at the same time. I really wish this could be your commander, but they can't. They're not the legendary creatures. So with all of this, I started to take a look at how I would build this deck. Enrage creatures, mostly dinosaurs, I think exclusively dinosaurs, also make good use of damage being dealt to them, which the Encore package really does nicely. But ultimately, I don't think I could make it work as well as I would want it to. So another commander where I would really appreciate some input from you guys. Amara, Soul of the Accord, is a 2-mana 2/2 elf cleric. Whenever Amara, Soul of the Accord, becomes tapped, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token with lifelink. It really shows that going wide is kind of the Selesnya thing. It is very low to the ground, it goes very wide, What I would incentivize is you having cards that make sure you can tap Amara even if it can't attack. It's only a 2/2, right? And you don't want to invest in it since it doesn't benefit from being buffed as much as other commanders would. So cards like Springleaf Drum, which just outright tap a creature to create a mana, or Smuggler's Copter and other vehicles or mounts where you can tap Amara to crew them, I think are mandatory. And then cards like Caretaker's Talent and Jaheira, Friend of the Forest, I think should be included in any token deck ever. And lastly, I wanted to talk about March of the World Ooze, an enchantment that is from the new Aether Drift set. Well, I guess it's not even a new set anymore by the time this comes out. It gives creatures you control base power and toughness 6/6, and they are oozes in addition to their other types. And whenever an opponent casts a spell, if it's not their turn, you get to create a 3/3 green elephant creature token that, of course, gets turned into a 6/6 ooze by the enchantment itself. So a very nice payoff that I can imagine sometimes just comes down on turn 6, then you kill 1 or 2 players at the same time. Glunch the Bestower, 3 mana 0/5, and for the first time in this video, we talk about a group hug commander. This little jellyfish has flying, and at the beginning of your end step, you get to choose a player. They get to put 2+1/+1 counters on a creature they control. Then you choose a second player, who will draw a card. And lastly, you get to choose a third player, who creates 2 treasure tokens. One thing I find interesting about Glunch is how different it will feel to play in a 3-person versus a 4-person pod. Because the idea for this as your commander is that you pretty much choose one person who gets nothing, which you can't do in a 3-person pod. Now, of course, this is only how it theoretically works. In practice, receiving 2+1/+1 counters sometimes is the same as getting nothing. Sometimes treasure tokens are worth almost nothing because everybody has like 20 mana already. And really only drawing a card is the thing that will always be very, very good. This conundrum made me put it on the list already, and it kind of reminded me of cards like Mangara the Diplomat. It's a 4 mana 2/4 human cleric, it has lifelink, and whenever an opponent attacks with creatures, if 2 or more of those creatures are attacking you or a planeswalker you control, you get to draw a card, and whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, you also get to draw a card. Cards like Mangara are kind of there to make it less of a group hug, so sometimes you might need the mana from the treasure tokens, and you have to give someone else the card. But then even if they do play 2 spells, because now they have more cards that they can play, you will also draw a card. When I saw the next commander, I had to look it up because I thought it was like the Universes Within version of a Winnie the Pooh secret layer that I had missed, but no, it's just a jumpstart card. This guy is called Hurska Sweet Tooth and is a 3 mana 3/3. It's a bear, and whenever Hurska Sweet Tooth attacks, you get to create a food token. Whenever you gain life though, you may pay 1 hybrid green or white mana, and when you do, target creature gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the amount of life you gained. Some obvious includes in a Hurska deck include cards like Beacon of Immortality that just double target player's life total. Then you pay an extra mana and suddenly you give a creature +40/+40. And since Beacon is an instant, one-shot someone out of nowhere as a combat trick. Since Hurska's effect is not +1/+1 counters, we need to look for more cards though that gain large chunks of life in an instant, because the Soul Sister package, while it creates a lot of life over the course of a game, it doesn't create huge chunks of life. It will have a bunch of triggers going off if you put a bunch of tokens into play, but still the individual triggers will only give +1/+1 if we pay for Hurska's ability. So cards like Nourishing Shoal combined with Worldspine Worm or Autochthon Worm would give you huge chunks of life, because Nourishing Shoal is an instant where you can exile a green card from your hand and then gain X life equal to the exiled creature's mana cost. And since those are 11 and 15, that would be pretty huge chunks of life for the Hurska trigger. Feed the Clan is a 2 mana card that if you have a power 4 or greater creature, just gives you 10 life. So we can treat it as a 3 mana, gain 10 life, and give a creature +10/+10. And one last thing that I wanted to talk about is the card True Conviction, because it is a 6 mana enchantment that gives creatures you control double strike and lifelink. Now, of course, lifelink is great for obvious reasons, but combine it with double strike, and you suddenly gain a lot more damage than you usually would from double strike. Let's say you attack with a 4/4 creature with double strike. You deal 4 damage on the first instance. Then you pay 1 because you just gained 4 life and your creature is suddenly an 8/8. So the second instance of the creature attacking would be 8 points of damage. So you can see that even having just a single creature with double strike immensely benefits from Hurska's ability. So yeah, I would look for creatures that have double strike and lifelink. There's a few more, but if you want to go broad and give it to all your creatures, True Conviction is your card. The next commander is very spicy, or should I say extremely vanilla? It's Jasmine Boreal of the 7, a 3 mana 2/4 human druid. Jasmine taps for 2 mana, but you get to spend this mana only to cast creature spells with no abilities. I know that I've talked a lot about commanders that make you go from 3 mana on turn 2 or 3, depending if you had a 1-drop that ramps, to 6 mana the following turn. But since you need to play creatures that don't have any abilities, it's hard to imagine a world where just this commander would be good. Thankfully, Jasmine has another ability, which makes it so creatures you control with no abilities can't be blocked by creatures with abilities. Now, this is obviously extremely powerful. Still, making a functioning deck out of this is probably not very easy. It does help that Aether Drift just added a bunch of new vanilla creatures. Are they good? No. But has that ever stopped anyone from putting cards in their commander deck? Also no. The trick with this commander is obviously to give all your creatures abilities at instant speed after the blockers have been declared. So cards like Hunter's Insight, which gives target creature the ability to draw as many cards as it deals damage to a player or planeswalker this turn. So it's unblockable after blockers have been declared. You Hunter's Insight on a creature and then you draw that many cards. Also, it works if you have abilities on other creatures, like Toski. Toski's a 4 mana 1/1 and my nightmare from the limited environment he was in. It can't be countered, it has indestructible, and it needs to attack every turn if able. But the last line of text cares about other creatures as well, because whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. And you see that, yes, this doesn't add an ability to your vanilla creatures, but it still benefits from your vanilla creatures being unblockable. So, types of cards you're looking for is vanilla creatures, yes, but also cards that give abilities at instant speed or care about creatures being unblockable or creatures entering the battlefield. Cards that have abilities themselves that are super strong but don't add abilities to your vanilla creatures. Let's go back to a classic with Karametra, God of Harvest, a 5 mana 6/7 god. It's a god, so it's indestructible. It's a god, so it's not always a creature. In this case, it's only a creature if your devotion to green and white, so the amount of mana symbols on permanents you control, is 7 or greater. And the last line of text, whenever you cast a creature spell, you may search your library for a forest or plains cards, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. I think this kind of deck is pretty simple. You pair it with good landfall cards, like Tireless Tracker, who creates a clue token whenever a land enters, and whenever you sacrifice a clue, you also get to put a +1/+1 counter on Tireless Tracker. You will pair this card with cards like White Mane Lion, which is a 2 mana 2/2 that bounces another creature you control to its owner's hand. So you will get a trigger from White Mane Lion, but then you also get to return a creature. It could even be the White Mane Lion itself to your hand. You can replay the White Mane Lion if you want, and so pretty much get all the forests and plains out of your deck. Or a card that is immensely powerful in the right deck, and expensive unfortunately, is Cloudstone Curio, which is a 3 mana artifact. Whenever a non-artifact permanent comes into play under your control, you may return another permanent you control that shares a permanent type with it to its owner's hand. So let's say you have a bunch of very cheap creatures, you can just repeatedly play 1 mana 1/1s or whatever to trigger Karametra's ability. And again, I think this is one of those commanders who, at least to some, might not read interesting, but it will play so well because you will never be unable to cast your spells once you stick the Karametra, And once you stick it, it's also harder to remove than others because it is not a creature, because it does have indestructible. So Karametra, I think you should give her a try if you're interested in that kind of strategy at all. We've had a legendary bear already, but it wasn't really a bear commander. So let's talk about Kudo, King Among Bears, a 2-mana 2/2 bear. Who would have thought? It has one line of text only, but that is good enough to put it on the list, because Kudo makes it so other creatures, not just your own creatures, have base power and toughness 2/2 and are bears in addition to their other types. One thing this does is it allows you to buff all creatures, no matter what creature type they usually have, by using Bear Lords. But really, in green-white, there is only a Eula, Queen Among Bears, which is also a 2-mana 2/2 bear, and whenever another bear enters the battlefield under your control, you get to put 2+1/+1 counters on a bear, or make target bear fight another creature you don't control, which is admittedly very powerful, but I'm always skeptical if there's only like one good lord for any given strategy. Thankfully, there are a lot of cards that don't care specifically about bear as a creature type. They just want to have you to have as many creatures of the same type as possible. Classic examples are Metallic Mimic, who you can choose to be a bear, and as long as you choose bear, each other creature you control of the chosen type, so bear, enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. There's also Banner of Kinship from Bloomburrow, 5-mana artifact. As it enters, you choose bear. This artifact then enters with a fellowship counter on it for each creature you control of the chosen type. And then, creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1 for each fellowship counter on this artifact. So you play a creature every turn leading up to turn 5, meaning you have a 1-drop, a 2-drop, a 3-drop, a 4-drop. You play Banner of Kinship, it has 4 fellowship counters. You chose bear, and all your creatures are obviously bears, so all your creatures will get +4/+4 until Banner of Kinship is removed. Unfortunately, since Kudo also turns your opponent's creatures into bears, not all cards that you might think work at first actually work. So for example, Harsh Mercy is a 3-mana sorcery where every player chooses a creature type, and then all creatures that aren't of one of the creature types chosen are destroyed. Since you will choose bear, and every creature is a bear, none of their creatures will be destroyed. And there's a bunch of cards, especially older cards, that are symmetrical in what they care about, so beware of those types of cards. Llanowar is a 4-mana 0/4 human noble that has the Coven keyword, which cares about having 3 or more different powers on your side of the board. In this case, at the beginning of combat on your turn, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature you control. And then, if you have Coven, meaning if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, you draw a card. What I like about Llanowar is it just sits in the back. It's not super oppressive. It's not this must kill commander for your opponents, which honestly can be a pretty frustrating experience if you just want to get your commander down, but it's so clearly the best creature. You will get targeted by 3 different players every time, and very quickly your commander text will ramp up to like 6. So Llanowar, she just sits there and enjoys the game. It provides counters, and ideally you'd also want to immediately draw a card the turn you play her, so you'd want to play a 1-drop, a 2-drop, a 3-drop, and then add 0 to the different powers. There is some leeway, of course, because you don't need 4 different powers, but only 3. But yeah, if I built a deck around Llanowar, I would try and make sure to have lots of 1 and 2 power creatures on the lower end of the curve, so Llanowar comes down, adds 0 as the 3rd different power, and draws a card at the end of turn. It also sits in a very interesting intersection because it gives +1/+1 counters. So cards like Market Back Walkers are nice in 2 ways. First of all, they have a variable power, since it enters with X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is the amount of mana you paid times 0.5, I guess. But also, if you play it as, let's say, only a 1/1 because you needed to fulfill the Coven, then you can later then add +1/+1 counters to Market Back Walker using Llanowar. Other great Coven payoffs are Augur of Autumn, which is a 3-mana 2/3. You may look at the top card of your library at any time, and you may play lands from among those cards on top of your library, But if you have Coven, meaning 3 or more creatures with different powers, you can also cast creatures from the top of your library. So if your deck consists 95% of lands and creatures, obviously this is a great value engine. And also, Redemption Choir is a 4 mana 3/3. It's a vampire cleric with Coven, and whenever it enters or attacks, if you have Coven, you get to return target permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So it's a Sun Titan, but for 4 mana, and only if you have Coven. But that really shouldn't be an issue if you built the deck correctly. Maya Bredagard Protector is a 5 mana 2/3 human warrior. Other creatures you control get +1/+1, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you get to create a 1/1 white human warrior creature token. Maya's on the list because I believe it to be the only landfall commander in green-white, and I really like how they gave it a very Selesnya spin by letting it create a bunch of tokens. Although I do believe they could have given her like one more line of text without it becoming oppressive, but in the end, it's just an uncommon from Kaldheim, so I don't think it would have been good for the limited environment. Now, of course, if we have a landfall commander, especially in green, we simply put every extra land drop card into our deck. Cards like Azusa will take up slots in this deck for sure, but I also wanted to use this time to talk about a few lands, since I recently built a deck trying to fit as many niche old weird lands into this deck simply because I love them so much. I think we all know Oboro, Palace in the Clouds, which is a land that taps for blue, but also for 1 mana you get to return Oboro to its owner's hand. So what this is used for is creating a landfall trigger every turn, if you only have 1 land drop per turn, but creating multiple land drops per turn if you have extra land drops, like Azusa gives you. So just by having Oboro, you can fill out all the land drops you have every turn. Now, the problem with Oboro is it costs like 15 bucks. But don't worry, we have Oboro at home. It's Ghost Town. Ghost Town is a land that taps for colorless mana. It comes into play untapped, so you can use that ability immediately. It also returns itself to its owner's hand for 0. Only thing is, you can only use this ability during another player's turn, so no filling out of extra land drops every turn. But at least you get to make sure you have a landfall trigger every turn. And I think that in and of itself is pretty powerful, even though, of course, Oboro is the much better card. Thawing Glaciers comes from a time where lands didn't need to tap for mana, so it comes into play tapped, and it doesn't tap for mana. Instead, for 1 and tapping Thawing Glaciers, you get to search your library for a basic land and put it into play tapped. This does not count towards your 1 land per turn, which is weird that they needed to specify it, but old magic I guess. Then you shuffle your library, and at end of turn, you return Thawing Glaciers to your hand. So it's kind of a super tap land. It comes into play tapped, and then you need to tap it again and then return it to hand. And all of this to just get 1 basic out of your land. The reason I wanted to talk about this is A, it enables you to have 2 land drops per turn, but it combos very nicely with Stonecedar Hierophant, a 4 mana 1/1 from Ravnica that untaps whenever a land comes into play under your control, and it taps to untap target land. So the way this works is, since Stonecedar untaps whenever a basic enters the battlefield, you get to untap Thawing Glaciers a bunch and use all of your mana to get all of these basics out of your deck, which thins the deck nicely and also gives you a bunch of landfall triggers at once. And this of course works because Thawing Glaciers is only returned to hand at end of turn. I think it's probably worth it to include Thawing Glaciers, even though it's not great without the Stonecedar Hierophant, but the fact that it can still double landfall every second turn, I think makes it a decent include anyways. But let's return to still unique design, but much newer and thus much more powerful design. It's Miriam Herd Whisperer, a 2 mana 3/2 human druid. As long as it is your turn, mounts and vehicles you control have hexproof, and whenever a mount or a vehicle you control attacks, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on it. Just the simple fact that this commander cares about mounts and vehicles was enough to secure it a spot on this list. White is the primary color for vehicles, but usually blue would be considered the secondary color, so let's see what green has to offer. I would recommend you to look at Aetherdrift and Thunder Junction for mounts, and Kaladesh and Kamigawa Neon Dynasty for vehicles. There isn't much, honestly, I could dig up for green. The best I could find is from Aether Drift, it's District Mascot. It's a 1 mana, 0/0, but it enters with a +1/+1 counter on it. For 2 mana and removing 2 +1/+1 counter from this creature, you get to destroy target artifact. And whenever this creature attacks while it's saddled, and saddled is really just crew for mounts, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on it. Of course, since Miriam comes down on turn 2 and you can attack with your District Mascot, it will immediately turn into a 2/2. And then if we're looking at white also, I think there's the much better mounts. I'm not going to mention vehicles too much since I think most people know the good vehicles by now, but mounts is really a type of card that I haven't paid a lot of attention to, so I assume other people might also have missed out on good mounts. There is Fortune, Loyal Steed. It's a 3 mana 2/4. When it enters, you scry 2, and whenever it attacks while being saddled, at end of combat, you exile it and up to 1 target creature that it was saddled by, and you return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control. So it attacks, and then it flickers itself, plus one of the creatures that saddled it. If we go even bigger, from Aether Drift comes Guardian Sunmare, a 5 mana 5/5 horse mount. It has Ward 2, very good for a 5 mana card, I love it. And whenever this creature attacks while it's saddled, you get to search your library for a non-net permanent card with mana value 3 or less and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. It does have saddle 4, but Miriam herself already has 3 powers, so you don't need much else to saddle the Guardian Sunmare. And of course, the effect is supremely powerful. Searching a library for something that costs 3 or less and putting onto the battlefield, very nice. A good artifact that is not a vehicle or a mount is Alacrian Armory. It's a 4 mana artifact, also from Aether Drift. It gives your creatures +0/+1 and vigilance, which is kind of whatever. But also at the beginning of combat on your turn, you get to choose up to 1 mount or vehicle you control, and until end of turn, that permanent becomes saddled if it's a mount, or becomes an artifact creature if it's a vehicle. So yeah, Wizards realized how close these mechanics are, meaning vehicles and mounts, so there is some good overlap, so don't be afraid to include both mounts and vehicles. And of course, we already talked about this, but cards like Amara that benefit off of being tapped are great inclusions as well. Miri, Weatherlight Duelist, also a character from way back, is a 3 mana 3/2 cat warrior. It has first strike, and whenever Miri attacks, each opponent can't block with more than 1 creature this combat. And as long as Miri is tapped, no more than 1 creature can attack you each combat. I like the defensive line of text way more. We just talked about mounts, so I think it's safe to say that I would advise you to include mounts and vehicles to tap Miri down, even if you can't attack, because maybe all your opponents have like 1/5/5 that would insta-kill Miri. So having cards like Springleaf Drum, like mounts, like vehicles that tap Miri is kind of a given. And then I think the big payoff for an effect as powerful as only being attacked by 1 creature per player per turn is Monarch. Court of Ardenvale, Court of Grace, but of course there's many great Monarch cards, and the enablers in white especially are, I think, the way to make Miri a good commander, because it should be way easier to deal with 1 attacking creatures per player than their entire board. If you combine that with protection for Miri, because if you rely on only being attacked by 1 creature per turn, you better make sure that's actually the case. And then, voila, you are the king of the commander round. A very unique space, and underrepresented space also, especially if you, like me, don't really like to build around universes beyond commanders, is sagas. So let's talk about Satsuki the Living Lore, a 2 mana 1/3 human druid. Satsuki taps to put a lore counter on each saga you control, but you can only activate it as a sorcery. So in practice, this would trigger the next chapter of a saga. And should Satsuki die, you get to choose 1 out of 2. Either you return target saga or enchantment creature you control to its owner's hand, or you get to return a saga card from your graveyard to your hand. So even if this 2 mana commander, which is low investment already, dies because people think it's too dangerous to be left alive, you get something nice out of it and then replay it for 4 later on, which is still not a big investment. Of course, if you want to play a Saga deck, you can just always resort to the good Enchantment or Proliferate commanders. But if you want a Saga specific command, there's exactly one alternative, and that's Narcy Fablesinger. So I think that's enough USP already, but let's look at some Sagas and see if Satsuki has a chance. There are a total of 57 Sagas with a green-white color identity, but that includes some Praetors that are creatures that turn into Sagas. Let's talk about the best ones then. Elspeth Conquers Death was a staple in Standard, and it still holds up in Commander quite nicely. It's a 5-mana Saga. First chapter, you exile target permanent an opponent controls, as long as it costs 3 or more. Second chapter makes non-creature spells your opponents cast cost 2 more until your next turn. And the last chapter returns target creature or planeswalker card from your graveyard to the battlefield. You get to put a +1/+1 counter on it if it's a creature, or a loyalty counter if it's a planeswalker. Battle at Helvault is a 6-mana saga. The first 2 chapters are the same. For each player, you get to exile target non-saga, non-land permanent until Battle of Helvault leaves the battlefield. And then the third chapter is you create Avacyn, a legendary 8/8 White Angel token with flying, vigilance, and indestructible. The Restoration of Eiganjo is a 3-mana saga. First chapter, you search your library for basic planes and put it into your hand. The second chapter, you discard a card. When you do, you get to return target permanent card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. And the last chapter is it transforms into a creature. The creature is a 3/4 vigilance. Whenever it attacks or blocks, you get a 1/1 colorless spirit token. The way Restoration of Eiganjo is used for the most part is you search your library for basic planes in the first chapter, and second chapter you discard said planes and immediately return it to the battlefield. So kind of as a ramp spell. Now all of these sagas were 1, white, and B, they were normal sagas without read ahead. So let's take a look at a green saga that is very good that has read ahead. But first let's talk about what read ahead even means. Read ahead pretty much means you get to choose at any chapter. You don't benefit from the prior chapters, but you could immediately go to the last chapter if you wanted to. This is very nice with Satsuki, because in the 3 chapter sagas, often the last one is the most desirable. So if you have read ahead, you could start at the second chapter and then go to the third chapter immediately instead of going from 1 to 2, which is often not as big a swing as going from 2 to 3 would be. The World Spell is a 7-mana saga with read ahead. First 2 chapters again are the same. You get to look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may reveal a non-saga permanent card from among them and put it into your hand, and the rest, bottom of your library in a random order. And in the third chapter, of course, the big payoff, you get to put 2 non-saga permanent cards from your hand onto the battlefield. Now, usually, you would read ahead to the third chapter if you wanted to get a big swing immediately, but that denies you the selection that the first 2 chapters offer. With Satsuki, you would start at the second chapter and at least get 1 card out of the top 7 of your library and put that card onto the battlefield immediately, which is much more powerful than just starting at the third chapter. Selvala, Eager Trailblazer, is a 4-mana 4/5 elf scout with vigilance. It comes from a weird set called Outlaws of Thunder Junction, and thus has a very weird ability. Whenever you cast a creature spell, you get to create a 1/1 red mercenary creature token with tap. Target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn, activate only as a sorcery. Yes, you heard that right. This green-white card creates red mercenary creature tokens. Very unique. And lastly, Selvala taps. You choose a color and then you add 1 mana of that color for each different power among creatures you control. So let's say you control 3 creatures, a 1/1, a 2/2, and Selvala. This will add 3 mana of any given color. I know the Valiant keyword is mostly red, but Bloomburrow has given us cards that care very much about being targeted. In Whiskervale Forerunner's case, a 4-mana 3/4 Mouse Bard, whenever it becomes the target of a spell or ability you control for the first time each turn, you get to look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card that costs 3 or less from among them, and you may put it onto the battlefield. If you don't put it onto the battlefield, you can put it into your hand, and then you put the rest of the cards you've seen at the bottom of your library. Valiant is a keyword that I would recommend you look at. There's also cards that don't specifically have the Valiant keyword, but they kind of do. Angelic Cup is a 2-mana 1/1 cat angel whenever it becomes the target of a spell or ability for the first time each turn. Of course, that includes opponent's abilities. You get to put a +1/+1 counter on it, and as long as it has 3 or more +1/+1 counters on it, it also gains flying. We already talked about Coven, so cards like Ambitious Farmhand, which is very great on its own, but also is able to transform into a different kind of creature if you have 3 or more different powers, is also a nice include. And since Coven was a keyword from Midnight Hunt, they also printed some spells around that mechanic that don't say Coven on it, but also care about creatures having different powers. So Celebrate the Harvest is a 4-mana sorcery where you search your library for X basic lands, where X is the amount of different powers among creatures you control, and you put those into play tapped. And Celestial Judgment is 6-mana sorcery, and for each different power among creatures on the battlefield, you choose a creature with that power and destroy each creature not chosen this way. So if you only have unique powers on the battlefield, it's a one-sided board wipe. The last type of cards that I want to talk about are 2 cats, namely Kutzil Malamet's Exemplar, a 3-mana 3/3 cat warrior. It says your opponents can't cast spells during your turn, which is, peace of mind. But also whenever 1 or more creatures you control, each with power greater than its base power, deals combat damage to a player, you get to draw a card. So if you have a creature that has more power than base power that deals damage, you draw a card. And of course the mercenaries that Selvala make are great at enabling that. And there is one more cat that also cares about creatures having more power than base power. And that is Sovereign Okinek Ahau. I probably butchered that name. It's a 4-mana 3/4 cat noble. It has ward 2. And whenever it attacks, for each creature you control with power greater than that creature's base power, you get to put a number of +1/+1 counters on that creature equal to the difference. And very, very quickly, I think you can escalate the board if you have a Selvala and a bunch of mercenary tokens and Sovereign Okinek, and it's a supremely powerful card for sure. Siona, Captain of the Pyleas, is a 3-mana 2/2 human soldier. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top 7 cards of your library, choose an aura card among them, reveal it, and put it into your hand. Then the rest goes to the bottom of your library in random order. Whenever an aura you control becomes attached to a creature you control, you get to create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. So the problem that Siona tries to solve is you being stuck with a bunch of enchantments in hand, but not having creatures to attach them to. So whenever you put an aura into play, you also create a 1/1 that might be the host of future auras. Of course, the first part of her ability is already very powerful. 3 mana, you replace her with an aura, so even if she dies, it's a 1/1, and if she gets to live, that's even greater because you get to create more 1/1s. There is also an infinite combo with this card that is just her and Shielded by Faith, which is a 3-mana aura that gives the creature it enchants indestructible, but whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you may attach Shielded by Faith to that creature. So you play Siona on 3, on 4 you play Shielded by Faith, you attach it to Siona. Since an aura becomes attached to a creature, you create a 1/1, and since a 1/1 entered, you get to trigger Shielded of Faith and attach Shielded of Faith to the newly created 1/1, thus triggering Siona, thus triggering Shielded of Faith, and so on and so forth. If your playgroup doesn't mind infinite combos, make sure to include Shielded by Faith in your deck. But there's also other great cards. Ajani's Chosen is a 4-mana 3/3 that kind of provides a similar effect to Siona, because whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, you get to create a 2/2 cat, and then you can attach the aura to that 2/2 cat. So if this works the way I think it does, you play an aura, equip it to, let's say, Ajani's Chosen, but then you create a 2/2 white cat and get to move the aura over. So I think that's also very nice if you have Siona already, because it means, again, another aura will become attached to a creature. There's also cards like Eidolon of Countless Battle, which is kind of the perfect intersection. It's a 3-mana 0/0 that gets +1/+1 for each enchanted creature you control, but also for each creature you control, and also for each aura you control. So it makes use of you having to play auras, yes, but also makes use of the bunch of 1/1s that you will create. And lastly, it is also a bestow creature, meaning you can play it as an aura and trigger Siona if you wanted to. Another card that I think should be included in any and every aura deck that has white is Umbra Mystic. It's a 2/2 for 3 mana that gives auras attached to permanents you control totem armor, meaning instead of the creature dying, you sacrifice the aura with totem armor instead. Extremely powerful because, of course, the issue with auras is getting 2, 3, 4 for 1 when the creature dies. Instead, just one of the auras dies and the creature gets to live. And since a lot of auras alter the power, I think also Sovereign Okinagahau is a good include, since it will give +1/+1 counters to all your enchanted creatures. And since we've mentioned him twice as a card in the 99, let's also quickly talk about him as a commander. Sovereign Okinagahau, 4 mana 3/4, again, War 2, is great for these creatures that you want to stay alive, that don't have an ETB. There's not much I want to say, because we've talked about them already, because we've talked about enchantments and other stuff. Two things I want to mention is Good Fortune Unicorn and Inspiring Call are both great +1/+1 counter enablers and payoffs, and they both got a reprint recently, so it's a good time to pick them up. And Sovereign Okinagahau also goes pretty wild with overrun effects, because you can sorcery speed, give all your creatures +3/+3, and then Sovereign attacks and also gives all your creatures 3 +1/+1 counters. So I think that's the way to go with Okinek, and also of course go as wide as you can, because yeah, there's no limit to how much power he can put into play. From Universes Within comes in an official Spider and Archer commander. It's Thaddeus Juniper Ascendant, a 4 mana 1/3 human monk. It has reach and hexproof unless it's attacking. Also, whenever a creature you control with reach attacks, you get to untap it, and it can't be blocked by creatures with greater power this combat. And of course, since it's a new card, it has a 4th line of text also. So whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you get to draw a card. Very clearly, 2 creature types, as I've said, come to mind when we think about reach, and that is spiders, and there's good individual spiders for sure, and that is archers. And for archers, honestly, I think they're almost there when it comes to being a playable archetype. Okay, maybe that's a bit of a reach, pun intended, but as often is the case, these niche types get really strong lords to give them kind of a love tap. For archers, that is for 1 Great Bow Doyen. Still no idea if that's correct. It's a 5 mana 2/4, gives all your archers +1/+1. Of course, it's a lord. But whenever an archer you control deals damage to a creature, that archer also deals that much damage to the creature's controller, which is a crazy effect since it's so much easier to deal immense amount of damage to a creature. And there's also Ohabi Kalira, which I almost picked as a commander for this list, but seeing there wasn't enough support for just archers, I left her out. It's a 3 mana 1/3 elf archer, reach. Untap all archers you control during each other player's untap step, and whenever an archer you control deals damage to a creature, you can pay 2, and if you do, draw a card. So as you can see, that's like, imagine this card just saying humans instead of archers. It would be insane. It would be like one of the best commanders ever. Untap all humans you control during each other player's untap step. That's crazy. That's just unheard of. But of course, it's archers, so it's much worse. But what I like about Thaddeus, maybe more than about Ohabi, since I obviously didn't include Ohabi on this list, is that you can just play generically good reach cards and make them work. So it's much more open than Ohabi. I think a great deal of cards in your Thaddeus deck will end up being archers, very good archers, maybe shapeshifters also, but you can play those good spiders if you want, and whatever other good reach creature you can find. So very good card design, as often is the case with like Universes Beyond cards. Some of them are just so great thematically, and I'm always glad when we get Universes Within treatments for them. Second to last, Tauren's Fist of Angels. When we talked about Sovereign, I left out a keyword that works really nice with his ability, and that is training. Training is a bit of a forgotten mechanic, it was not very successful, but this commander tries its hardest to make it a thing, and I think he might be streets ahead on this. Torrens is a 3-mana 2/2 human cleric that it itself has training, and training reads whenever this creature attacks with another creature with greater power, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Also, whenever you cast a creature spell, Torrent has a second line of text that reads, whenever you cast a creature spell, you get to create a 1/1 green and white human soldier creature token with training. So he does two things. First of all, he grows in size. Second of all, he doubles up all your creature ETBs, because whenever you play a creature, you will also get a 1/1 green-white human soldier. And then, if you go into the attack step, if you have just one creature that is always a bit ahead in power of your other creatures, slowly but surely, all of these 1/1 white human soldier tokens will turn into huge buffed up dudes. A creature you could play that ensures you always have a bigger creature is Champion of Lamphold, who I've previously mentioned as already just a very good card on their own. It's a 3-mana 1/1. Creatures with power less than Champion of Lamphold can't block creatures you control, and whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on Champion of Lamphold. This really is a must remove in any deck, but especially in Torrents, since you double up your creature ETBs, and then you also benefit off of Champion of Lamphold having more power than the training creatures. This card just goes nuts in a Torrents deck. And then Tilda Dawnheart Rime is a great payoff for a humans deck, and I think Torrents will most likely end up being a very human-focused deck. It has protection from werewolves. For 4 mana and tapping, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, but most importantly, human creatures you control have tap at 1 mana of any of these creatures' colors to your mana pool. And with this subset of cards and all the good humans, I think you already have a pretty good idea of what a Torrents deck will look like. The last commander represents an archetype that I really haven't given much love overall this entire series, and it's also something that green-white stands for more than any other color combination. It's Life Gain. Life Gain is a very popular archetype, and Ajani Spritebait is probably one of the favorite creatures of all time among new players, so why not make it your commander? Trelasara Moondancer is a 2-mana 2/2 elf cleric. Whenever you gain life, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on Trelasara and scry 1. And that's it. It's very simple. You know I love 2-mana commanders. It rewards you for a life gain, but unlike Hurska, who cared about gaining big chunks of life all at the same time, this one cares about individual life gain triggers. So of course, the supporting package is much stronger. I would play, as you all should, the Holy Trinity of Soul Sisters, Essence Warden, Soul's Attendant, and Soul Warden, 1-mana creatures that care about just any creature entering the battlefield. You can also include as many of the kind of worse cousins that also cost 1 mana but only trigger off of your own creatures entering the battlefield. And voila, suddenly you have a dirt cheap Voltron commander that will grow in size extremely quickly. But not only that, because let's be honest, it will just be a big dumb beater. It has no keywords whatsoever, but you will have excellent card selection. And I am sure you already know how to fill the 99 of a life gain strategy that rewards you for beating your opponents up. Man, it took me a while to get this video out, but we are finally back and I already have a slightly different video planned that will also showcase cool cards, but maybe not take as much time to produce. But don't worry, this series will continue on. If you watched this until the end, thank you so much, and always remember, be kind to yourself and others. Goodbye.